So moving forward to the next session is BioAgri. The future of agriculture lies at the intersection of innovation, regulatory frameworks, and corporate strategies. This panel discussion will bring together experts from science, law, and the corporate world to explore how these fields can collaborate to shape a sustainable and resilient global food system. With this, I am pleased to invite the moderator for this session, Ms. Soumya Balindran, co-founder and chief business officer, C6 Energy, and governing body member of ABLE. Joining us as the keynote speaker is Dr. K.K. Narayanan, founder and managing director of Staika Seeds and former president of ABLE. And the speakers for the session, Dr. Paresh Verma, executive director and chief executive of BioSeed SE Asia, Mr. Burjes Godrej, executive director of Godrej Agrovet, Ms. Neha Srivastava, partner, Remfree and Sagar, and Ms. Ritu Verma, co-founder and managing partner, Ankur Capital. I request Ms. Soumya Balindran to please take over the session.
Hi, thank you everyone for being here. I think after a fantastic pharma session, we're going to spend some time looking at what the agri can contribute to bioeconomy. On that note, I'd like to invite Dr. K.K. Narayan to give us a quick keynote speech followed by a panel discussion.
Good afternoon, friends. I'll make it really quick. So I just want to flag 4 issues which is going to determine the future of agriculture, not just in India, but all over. It's time we have a reimagination of the agricultural sector. We have been for too long looking at it as a livelihood compulsion, but it's time that we need to look at it as an industry. If you really look at it, the agriculture sector, depending on which statistics or which data you look at, employs about between 40 and 50% of all the employable people in the country. The contribution to GDP is just a mere 12 to 13%. So there's the economic contribution of a person involved in farming, primary farming particularly, is way less than what is the contribution of people involved in the other sectors. So agriculture has to be more income generating. If you really look at it, agriculture is probably one of the largest private enterprises in the country. Each unit may be small, but when you aggregate them, it is very big. So we need to look at ways and means to increase the income of people involved in agriculture. Secondary agricultural value addition compared to primary agriculture or commodity production could be one of the areas. You can have multiple ways of skinning the cat. You can look at market reforms so that more money flows into the pockets of the people engaged in primary agriculture. I won't go further. I hope we will get a chance to discuss some of these areas. The second thing that we all talk about is climate change. Agriculture, because it is concerned with the land, utilization of the land, has got a big part in either contributing to global warming or in taking measures to mitigate the effect of global warming. If I remember the statistics right, the wetland rice cultivation contributes about 10% of all the methane emissions in the world. So there is no debate about climate change except in the minds of a few presidents and a few people. It is all about, the debate is about how much is the anthropogenic contribution. And I believe that people in agriculture are contributing to global change. Can we do things, leverage technology to mitigate the effects of agriculture on climate change? And also in developing varieties which are not just resilient to climate change or environmental stresses, but which can lead to adaptation and which can also lead to tolerance of the environmental stresses. So multiple technologies can be brought in to affect this change. Humans have a huge impact on agriculture, and humans have a huge impact through agriculture on the environment of this planet. Now, people talk about natural farming. Now, farming is not natural. Farming is a clearly human-driven, artificial activity. So natural farming, in my mind, is an oxymoron. I believe that, but agriculture can be made nature-friendly. Now we talk about the nutrients required for agriculture. Nitrogen is a major nutrient. The production of synthetic nitrogenous fertilizers is one of the major contributors for climatic variabilities and also ecological damage. The Haber-Bosch process requires a lot of energy, lot of pressure, and then converting the ammonia to actually the urea, the largest used nitrogenous fertilizer, is another big energy intensive process. Can we infuse certain changes in some of the microorganisms or select those microorganisms to do at least some supplement some of these functions is something that we need to think about. Finally, agriculture, as opposed to what we used to think earlier, is today becoming an area of confluence of multiple technological domains. Now, we used to think about agriculture, about agronomy, about genetics, about botany. But today, you think about a technology domain. We all talked about artificial intelligence. You can think about IoT. You can think about machine learning. They all have a great influence on agriculture and agriculture productivity and agricultural quality. Now, I think Murali mentioned about precision farming. It's all about multiple domains of technology being brought to bear on the production and the quality of the agricultural produce. I think I will stop here. And so these are the 4 areas. One is augmenting the income levels of farmers and making them better contributors to the economy of the country. It also leads to equitable, there are multiple ways of doing that. Confluence of technological domains, that was the last point I made. Adapting resilience or tolerance to climatic changes. And finally, how do we make this whole process eco-friendly and make it a big business in the country? Thank you very much.
Setting out the stage on what are the key areas we need to focus on. We definitely have a very interesting panel here today, a mix of investors, science, corporate, and pure scientists as well. So maybe we can start with, an overarching question on globally, what do we need to do to manage the rising food demands while also making sure a climate change, water scarcity, the land degradation issues are managed together. Maybe we can start with you, Vijay, and move down.
So globally is a very hard question to answer, but I can talk about the Indian context. I think that's a good way to get started, something that we're all familiar with. So I'd say what we're seeing in India right now is that we are very self-sufficient with the staples. You look at your wheat, your rice, thanks to the Green Revolution, we've made huge strides in productivity in those aspects. But there's a real gap happening in other kinds of sectors of agriculture. If you look at livestock, you look at the cattle yields in India compared to other countries, it's often a fourth or a fifth of where they are in other countries. If you look at oil seeds and pulses, we still have to import those from other countries. Our productivity metrics are lagging over here. If you look at horticulture, there's so much potential in India for horticulture. We are already exporting to other countries, but we need to think about how to further augment that, because that will give very good returns to farmers. And if you look at, this shift away from wheat and rice, that will also have environmental benefits. Because you look at stubble burning. Stubble burning happens for wheat and rice. It doesn't happen for the other sectors of the economy, other sectors of the agriculture economy as much. So you can get huge environmental benefits from that. Drip irrigation, that will help with our water challenges. Using smart technologies, AI tools to ensure that we deliver just the right amount of water to the crop. So that's really what I'd say from the Indian context. I think it has huge lessons for the world as well. Countries need to focus on their comparative advantage, both economically and environmentally, thinking about their water resources. And if we do that, we can definitely make huge progress in food security and doing it in an environmentally sustainable manner.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'll just, take off from some of the points that you mentioned. In India, while we seem to have an impression that we are self-sufficient and we are even exporting food, I think there are some specific crops and specific agri commodities where we either already have shortages, like you mentioned, in oilseed and pulses, or we are looking at shortages in the near future. In feed, for example, in cotton. And I think we need to really focus on improving the productivity in these crops so that we can meet the demands that we either have today or we are foreseeing in the future. And I, for one, was very encouraged when I actually heard the finance minister in her budget speech focusing on increasing productivity. Because in India, we have always, talk about success in terms of increased production rather than increased productivity, which is, as you all would know, is one of the lowest in the world. So I think we need to focus a lot on using new technologies to improve productivity, because a lot of it can be improved through deploying new genetic technologies, whether they are GM, non-GM, etc. But ultimately, the genetic potential has to be increased so that we can increase oilseed production, we can increase pulse production. We There is a lot of pressure on crops like corn and soybean, not just from oilseed perspective, but also from the feed perspective. And if you talk to the people from the poultry industry or from the animal feed industry, they are really worried, especially given the government's focus on bioethanol. They are really worried about the availability of some of these commodities for feed. Similarly, textile industry is projecting acute shortages of the raw material going forward. In fact, from being the second largest exporter of cotton, maybe 7-8 years ago, we will be net importer of cotton this year, and that shortage and that gap is going to increase. So I think we need to really focus on deploying new technologies and working at convergence of genetic technologies, computing power, and using and functional genomics, and using all that to develop crops which are high yielding, not only in terms of genetic potential, but also in terms of climate resilience, because climate resilience is not just one or two traits. It's a combination of several traits which are, which have very complex genetic mechanisms. And I think convergence of these three things will really help us in making us do that.
I largely agree with, am I on? Okay, agree with Paresh and Burgess. We have, to a large extent, met the calorific need in terms of food production. But I want to add another dimension. When we talk about the hidden hunger, the micronutrient deficiencies, there is still some way to go. And in this context, there's a great opportunity for a country like India, because we have some of these cereals which used to be called coarse grains or something, but we need to rename them as nutri-cereals. I'm talking about ragi. They need to be global grains like quinoa, and they have the potential to be raised as global grains. And there's a great opportunity for value addition. So augmenting the incomes of these people combined with diversification of the diet so that we can address the micronutrient deficiency also adequately. Thank you.
Thank you. I think most of the points are covered here, but I will try to take the bird's eye view and consolidate under three categories. First of all, definitely adoption of smart technologies. We are at Agriculture 4.0 revolution, and it is all about adopting smart technology, be it precision agriculture or having improved irrigation systems or management of livestock and so on and so forth. So that all directed to improving the overall yield as well as improving the overall traits of the crops would help in achieving that food demand that is existing. And at the same time, I think we also need to sort of focus on the development of these crops which are high yielding transgenically through recombinant DNA technology. For example, if you have to address the climate change, we have drop resistant crops, herbicide resistant crops, and insecticidal resistant crops. So all of those can be developed to meet the needs. And third would be address the soil, the soil health and soil nutrition to make the plants resilient to the climate change and the uncertainties of the environment that is around. And while summing all of that up, while we are doing all of this, it is important to keep in mind the three things. We have to invest, innovate, and protect. And invest in these emerging technologies, invest in the innovations in these emerging technologies, protect them with the IP strategically, and not just stop there, but take it forward to commercialization and leverage that IP portfolio so that it benefits the overall, the industry grows and we are able to meet those food demands. So one thing that is there is that right at the beginning, every industry needs to have an IP strategy which is aligned with the business goals, which is very important. And this is not just important to have a clear direction to put in R&D efforts, but also identify which areas of that emerging technology we have to put in efforts in, where the growth is, where there is more opportunity of collaboration. And I think this is what largely we need to focus on to meet the overall demand that we are looking at.
Thank you. I think we've covered a lot of ground coming down the line here. I think from where I sit, and back to your question, Soumya, on the global opportunity, I think, intensification of agriculture, if I can call it that, and that encompasses a large amount of stuff, right? From, we've discussed a lot about seeds and, genetically getting higher yields, but also higher nutrition and different kinds of nutrition that we need out of it. So we really need to get much more out of each acre, each drop of water. And that, of course, comes down to fundamental science and how we can actually make that shift happen while keeping the constraints of, not using up the resources of future generations and being resilient to the, the vagaries that we are all subject to today. I think the one other point that I would like to add is that globally, you want to make sure that all these resources that are going in to produce the food doesn't get wasted. So there's another aspect of agri, which is about making it from production to people. In a lot of the, in India, we sit at post-harvest losses, which are very, very high due to multiple different reasons. There's nutrition loss as well. Most Western countries, you sit at, consumer, post-reaching the consumer, the plate, things getting wasted. So I think there is an element, if you want to look at the larger food, land, agri confluence, of making sure that everything that does get produced actually goes to its last intended use case. So I think these are the opportunities globally, and globally people are focused on this with different aspects.
I think thanks for adding that additional perspective. But it was very curious what Paresh and Narayanan had mentioned, right? And I think the rest of the team also spoke about this. How do you get more for less? How do you use water more efficiently? How can you produce nutrition? It's not just about food. On that, I wanted to ask both of you, combined question. Apart from GM, are there any technologies which can help in bringing newer varieties which can be much more efficient? And how do you bridge the gap between the lab and the farm scale up? Maybe Paresh, you can start and keep
Sure. Thank you. I think there are these new opportunities which we have in terms of using new technologies, such as through genome editing, for example. And I say that this is a great opportunity for a country like India and for us, because of the very progressive policy decision that the government made about, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, in which they they have said that the SDN1 and SDN2 type of edits, which can also occur in nature, will not be regulated like GM. And this gives us an opportunity to actually improve a lot of traits whether they are related to climate resilience, whether they are related to improving yields, or sustaining yields through disease resistant, etc., or biofortification that Dr. Narayanan was talking about. I think that is something that is a great opportunity. The other opportunity we have is through very comprehensive selection based on functional genomics, computing power, phenotyping, which we in our peer groups call genomic selection or whole genome selection. Because a lot of these traits are, like I said, they do not have simple genetic mechanisms. They are polygenic in nature. They have a lot of epigenetic effects. I think this comprehensive selection at the genome level, using the convergence of these of genotyping, phenotyping, computing, AI, ML driven computing models, etc., I think will enable us to do that as well.
Thank you. You are using GM in this talk as being confined to transfer of a foreign gene. But if you look at a larger context, GM has been associated genetic modification for changing the nature of a plant. It has been the modification of the nature and the nurture of plants from the very advent of agriculture that we have got the crops that we have today. So if you want to exclude GM in the narrow sense, there are many techniques and many examples of improvements brought about either for nutritional enhancement or for productivity enhancement or for stress tolerance. I can give you off the top of my head an example of Swarna Sub-1. Swarna is a variety of rice. Sub-1 is a molecular marker which is used for allowing the plant to resist or adapt to stress tolerance like flooding. And it's widely cultivated all over India. Nobody knows. So it's in a broader sense, that's also genetic modification, but not a foreign gene. It's a rice gene itself which is modified. For nutritional enhancement, there's the example of the first gene-edited tomato released by a Japanese company called Sana Tech. The name of the tomato variety is called Sicilian Rouge. It was developed by a friend of mine. And there is an enhanced production of GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, which is actually a nutraceutical. And that's now widely being marketed in Japan, which a country is very sensitive to GM modification. That's been the first country to commercialize gene-edited technology in tomato. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll talk about genetics as well, but interestingly from a livestock perspective, because we are doing studies on breeding dairy cattle for better milk productivity and at the same time better immunity. So what we've been noticing is that you have these foreign breeds that have very high milk productivity, but their immunity is low. They're not as suited to the Indian conditions, whereas the Indian breeds, on the other hand, have low milk productivity, but they have excellent immunity. So how can we get the two together? How can we create crossbreeds, or even in many cases just have an Indian surrogate mother and you get that placental immunity from that Indian surrogate mother? It's like IVF for cattle. So these are all techniques that we can use to think about improving productivity. Crops, absolutely, but let's think about what we can do on the livestock sector as well for our protein needs.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because my next question was on, in agriculture, we talk a lot about crops all the time, but cattle is also a very, very important thing. And being a leader in this space, fisheries, cattle and fisheries. Being a leader in this space, what are your thoughts on, like you mentioned a couple of new technologies that is required. From a business perspective, are there other things that we need to pick up? And the second thing would be on, we heard about, the minister was talking about the budget, improving oil seeds production. What are the sustainable ways of doing this? Because there's a lot of talk about how oil palm is X, Y, and Z around the world. But it is a truth that we cannot go away for a country like India from that. But what can we do to make them more sustainable and nature-friendly?
So on the topic of oil palm, we have a very good sustainable oil palm cultivation initiative that's being done by our company as well as 3 other major companies. And what we are doing is ensuring that there is no deforestation for oil palm, because there are many concerns regarding that in other countries. We are ensuring that we provide the farmers with good germplasm, good planting material, so that the oil palm trees that they grow have good productivity, and that we use all the waste material to power the mills and power the factories that process the oil palm fruit. So those factories are 100% renewable using biomass power from the empty fruit bunches after the fruit is put through the mill. So these are techniques that we are doing to improve oil palm sustainability, drip irrigation that I mentioned earlier, to ensure that the trees get just the right amount of water. So these are all techniques that we are using to improve sustainability in oil palm. And we do need oil palm. There are some concerns over the health effects of palm oil. I think those are overstated. I think it's an important part of a healthy diet as long as it's supplemented with other oils. The main things we need to avoid are trans fats, but you have to think about all the other parts of the oil palm tree also. The palm kernel oil that comes, which is very similar to coconut oil and has a lot of important cosmetic and other industrial applications, and all the other materials that can be used, and keeping in mind the fact that this is the most productive way to get our edible oil needs, more productive and more remunerative for the farmer than all the other vegetable oils.
Thanks, Pujus. I think we heard a lot on the science, how agriculture can move, and that's something that we heard. I want to shift the gears a little bit and hear from an investor perspective. The last couple of years, Ritu, has been a little slow in this whole industry, the amount of VC money. So the question, I mean, whenever I talk to my other startup colleagues, the question is like, are we lacking good companies, or are we lacking investment of, the available investment? What's your take on that?
It's always a mix, right, is what it is. But I would not use the last few years as a metric, because I think the last few years have nothing to do with the opportunities or the companies. It has to do with much more on the macro and the financial markets, and really why money has pulled out from one place to the other, right? But I think it is a good time, because there are always people working on interesting opportunities. So yeah, it might be a slightly harder journey, but it's anyway a hard journey. So, adding a little bit to it is just what it is. So it's the opportunities haven't gone away, right?
That's good to know.
Yeah. So I think the opportunities are still all around, right? We've all spoken about, challenges here, which are opportunities. So I don't really see why that is that goes away here.
Got it. I think Naren, you want to add something?
My question was, VCs want only upside and they're not willing to share the downside. That is really what I'm noticing. That when you say that it's a mix, I think VCs must learn to take the risk.
100% agree
But
with you.
what is happening is VCs only want upside and they don't want any downside.
But that is not called a VC. That's called a loan. Something. So I'm 100% agreeing with you. I do think that there is a lack of risk capital, and there is a lack of risk capital in this country for the types of things that all of you do, which I think is a shame. But it's a battle. It's a battle we all have to fight. Because the thing that and I heard this yesterday, right? They had someone tell me, you guys invest in some weird stuff. We don't really understand that, right? So part of it is that because there's a technical aspect to it, people just run away from that, right? And they don't really know how to walk through the breaking up of the risk in this, what I'd say more science-led opportunities. So absolutely, I think we have to grow the risk capital appetite in this country, and I think it's going to need people who understand the risk profiles to be backing it. You're not going to get someone who gives a loan come in and underwrite any of these innovations that we are talking about, because that's not their DNA. That's not what they have developed to do.
No, thanks for that, Ritu. I think I have a follow-on, but I'll let KK go ahead. He had a comment.
Yeah, while we are on this talking, thanks, Kiran, for asking that question. I have also always thought that VCs are not venturesome enough. Sorry about that. But I think one of the reasons...
I can't disagree. I can't disagree.
One of the reasons which I think they're like that is because, particularly for certain traits like stress tolerance, if you make the investments to create that, how do you capture the value? There has to be imaginative ways of capturing the value. And I think in this country, there are impediments in terms of regulation and other things. So when you introduce, let's say, so the private sector will be shy of entering, and venture capital firms like yours will be shy of investing in such programs because the value capture mechanism is not very clear. I think we need to really debate this in terms of policy and other initiatives so that more money flows into investment in innovation in some of these areas. Thank you.
Thanks.
I think the biggest thing you can do is show and tell, right, which brings more people in.
No, but if
And-
you show, let us say I showed that there is drought tolerance.
No, money.
I know.
Money.
That's right. So for drought tolerance, you are creating an incremental
Yeah.
value, but that value is there only when there is a drought.
Yeah.
Under normal situation, so can I now team up with an crop insurance firm? And then I think those kind of things we need to think about creatively. I am quite amazed by the way MG sells its electric car. You know, they sell the car, but the battery is on a subscription-based model, depending on the kilometer. So you can think about innovative ways, but we are shy of thinking. I think
Thanks,
that's a
KK.
problem.
So Ritu, my follow-on question to that was, see, in India, again, I'm coming from a startup ecosystem, right? So the good thing that we notice with the VC capital is the early stage capital is very, very quick and much more accessible. But once the company starts growing to a certain stage, you go into stage C, B, C, D, right? That's where we really call the value of death coming into the Indian companies, right? Literally, which is a little different from US, where the gestation periods and the initial injection is much larger for the companies to kind of survive. What would your 2 cents be on, what can India as an ecosystem do to make sure we have more investment coming in those crucial stages?
So I think there are 2 points there, right? I used to think like you, Soumya, oh my God, those people have raised $100 million, etc. But an advisor to us said that you can overeat and you can undereat.
Absolutely.
And so once you go and pull back the, peel the onion, you find there's a hell of a lot of overeating happening. We don't have an overeating problem. We may have an undereating problem, which we have to get to at the right level. So that absolutely that capital has to be right sized here. I think the challenge in a lot of scientific led companies is that there is a journey, and the journey is about hitting milestones. I think for example, in drug discovery, it's very well documented, right? There's a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials. So I think there's an external thing which is telling you that you have reached these different phases. However, there are exactly those same things for any other company. And these stages of the company cannot be revenue generating because you have to make this credible, you have to de-risk it, you have to show that it works. And the challenge in the Indian ecosystem is that most of the second level of sort of investors that you're talking about are used to underwriting financials. Right? They're not used to underwriting milestone-driven value increases. Until we increase the education and the understanding of milestone-based value increases, that will remain a challenge.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Understanding that getting to that certain milestones is more important than getting to that final product itself and investing in that. So I think that's a very valuable insight. So we'll discuss a little more later if you have time on what else does the startup founders need to focus on to make sure they go through that journey well. Neha, I have a question for you. One of the things which is very crucial in biotechnology-based companies is IP, right? If you don't get it right and early, there's a huge downside potential possible. So from that space, what do you think should be the key watch-out points for companies, startups, founders, larger companies to make sure they're covered in the long journey?
So what happens is that when you start up, you're largely focused on the business, to grow the business, launch the product, and you lose sight of the IP that is very, very crucial that in that early stages. Now, why it is important is because it just not helps you in protecting your innovation, but it is also guiding you as to where to invest and what to protect. For example, the IP. When we look at the IP landscape, it is one of the areas that gives you, it's called IP intelligence, that gives you much information as to which direction to take, where to invest, and where to innovate. If we do not know this at the first stage, first of all, we will be covering a lot of distance in areas which may have less potential of commercial growth. Secondly, there are certain indicators. When we also talk about bioeconomy, we talk about the contribution of the industry in the bioeconomy, but we don't talk about what is IP doing, what is the contribution of IP. If we look at all the developed economies, and Dr. Chandru talked about the comparison with what China is doing right, I think this is one of the things that we are losing sight of, is what kind of IP that we are generating. I would say, just to understand it a bit more, for example, if you do not have an IP, if there is no IP activity that is seen, it is a direct indication of low R&D activity, less technological advancement, less innovation, and fewer opportunities for collaboration and foreign direct investment. So
Thanks, Neha, because I think that ties up with what Ritu was also talking, right? Milestones.
Yes,
Milestones doesn't.
exactly.
This could be one of that. Quickly, just comments from KK and from you on this. You wanted to share something?
When we talk about IP, I think as far as agriculture is concerned, the protection of varieties, new varieties, which is a key component of innovation and development, is very fussy. You can't patent a variety in India. It comes under the PPV FRA, Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act. So if you register under that, it is protected and not protected, because there are so many exemptions around it, farmer exemption and all. So capturing value becomes very difficult.
Thanks.
It stems from the mindset that we are still a hungry nation.
It's a part of a developing nation problem. So I think it's a
too slowly.
that's a different debate. I think we need.
Mind, the country is progressing,
Right.
but in our minds we are still stuck in the 1940s.
Okay, quick comment, Paresh.
Comment is, agriculture in most of the developing countries is a politically sensitive subject.
Yeah.
And IP in agriculture, therefore, is extremely sensitive. Not only sensitive, I think the governments are usually very slow to enact regulations. India is a good example. And even when there are regulations, they are very, they are not very good at enforcing it. So in India, for example, if we have to use new technologies or take that as an example, there are two IPs involved. One is related to the breeding, which Dr. Narayanan mentioned, which is covered under PPV and FRA Act. The other is related to the biotech invention that has gone into it. And in India, there is no harmonization between what is covered under the Patent Act and what is covered under the PPV and FRA. And that is a sad state of affairs. That is one thing which is proving to be a deterrence to innovation.
Thanks.
That the lack of adequate IP protection. The other thing is, because it's so sensitive a subject, there are often, we have seen in India, for example, we have had price controls. So that is another reason why the innovation, which is really a deterrence to innovation in R&D.
Thanks, Paresh. I think that covers the IP in a very large way. So, Butchis, I have a question for you. We spoke about early stage companies, what they go through, and the IP protection. But you're from a traditional large industry moving into a newer technology era, right? And navigating a bigger company could be much more challenging than a smaller company with 10, 20 people. How do you go through these transformations on a regular basis to make sure you're always, keeping that being at the forefront of the whole technology lead?
So R&D has always been a huge focus for us. We have various R&D centers for the different businesses, and we're very happy to engage and partner with startups, universities, both in India and abroad, on trying to see how we can bring that innovation to Indian agriculture. Because we know what the problems are across so many sectors: low productivity, low farmer incomes. How can we improve that? So that's really what we try to solve for. So we do have, partnerships. We're very happy to be part of Ritu's Think Ag initiative. That gives us very good insights into what's happening in the agri ecosystem. We've worked with a lot of Japanese innovators in agri-chemicals to bring their products to India. So we license from them, we import their material, we get it registered in India, and we do trials with farmers to see how it's doing and how we can adapt it to Indian conditions. So those are some examples of what we're doing in agri-innovation. And I really feel that if all companies in India did that, we'd be in a better position. We have a long way to go, a lot of things to learn. Earlier it was discussed how it's often, replicating what's already there for India, making it more efficient. How can we develop solutions indigenously for India's challenges and then later send them to the world? I think that really has to be the focus area, and we are moving towards that, and we do want to move towards that as quickly as we possibly can.
But just a follow on that is, you said you work with a lot of Japanese companies, right? Do you see a lot of innovation happening in India? And is those partnerships also something that large companies look for?
No, as far as this particular sector, agri-chemicals, no, I don't see a focus on new molecules, new discovery happening in India. There is one company, PI Industries, that is investing heavily in new molecules and coming up with them at the Udaipur R&D center. But other Indian companies more focused on, process innovation, cutting down the number of steps to synthesize something, trying to do that, but not really focusing on new innovations. A lot of the new innovations in agri-chem are happening from the big companies, your Bayer, BASF, Syngenta, etc., and a lot of promising Chinese and Japanese companies that are doing that. So we really need to pick up the game in India and start thinking about new molecules and new techniques in this sector. And it's largely true in other aspects of animal health and other things like that as well. There are, of course, a few exceptions, a few very positive stories. If I had to aggregate everything, I'd say India has a long way to go.
Thank you. I think that clearly points out a deficit area where we need to finish, when we need to start competing more. Last comments, Ritu, to success. Yeah, sorry?
Can I add a comment? I think something we have not talked about.
Yeah.
But, we talked about this being an industry. So let's also just think about how we can make some of these nutrients not from the land, right? There are other ways. I know you're doing seaweed stuff, whether we're making sugars, oils. I know Ezel's standing there making proteins. So, from a bioindustrials perspective, we can make some of these things, rethink how that is. And that's a strength that this room sits with. And it'd be good to see much more of that coming out.
Thanks. So the last question to you is, to have successful ag startups grow out, what should the founders focus on? Is there any key skill sets that they should be focusing on and red flags to walk away from?
I think that entrepreneurship is not different depending on which industry that you go to. It's very much more about softer skills and being able to make it through. To me, it's a given that if you're going to be in an industry, you understand the industry and you have to navigate that. So that to me doesn't sound like an insight. That sounds like a hygiene here, right? So I think there's nothing different in an agri company. I think you've got to navigate that. Time skills can be different, ways that you go to market, ways that you do that. That's different in every industry. So when I say you need to understand the industry, you need to be able to take the different kind of stakeholders and different ways to sort of get there. And it's not that different to me. That's where I sit.
Okay, thanks. KK, your last comments?
Yeah, I would say that entrepreneurs, particularly in the new areas, bringing AI, drones and all into tech, should actually work in teams which has got specialization in different areas. I find that many very smart engineers are working on drones, but they don't have in their team somebody
Ag
who
and
is
biology. I completely agree.
biology.
Yeah.
So somebody who has an expertise in developing drones for taking wedding photographs cannot immediately transfer to spraying crops with drones. I think that's one key thing that
it's a good point, because see, in some of the Western countries that we see, there's a lot of collaborations. They don't look at each other as competitors, and there's a lot of partnership which goes on. And in Indian ecosystem, that is limited. There is some of the signs that you see partnerships of coming together, smaller companies, universities, bigger companies. But I think we need a lot more of that to really leverage on the skills that we have.
Just one more point to be added. When you talk about AI and machine learning and all, the learning data set is very, very important. And many of the people are lacking that, and that needs to be produced by crop scientists who work on crops.
Sounds good. Paresh?
Or with animals.
Thanks. Paresh, last comment very quickly. I don't want to be the person standing before their lunch. So.
No, I totally agree with what Dr. Narayanan said. And I think in addition to that, especially when we are talking about, from my perspective in the seed industry, when we are talking about new technologies, I think we have a situation where the government can remove a lot of hurdles which are currently slowing down innovation. And that is because even the regulatory pathway of doing research is not really very predictive and clear in our space. Let alone the uncertainties related to value capture later on when you do have a successful technology out there. So I think those are the two areas. So there are, plus obviously the lack of adequate protection of intellectual property that you create. So these are the three critical areas where I think improvements are needed for us to have a clear path, and for entrepreneurs, therefore, to get adequate support from investors.
What is your last comments on this?
We'll go to questions. I think that would be good.
We don't have too much time. Neha, anything for you to share at the end on the regulatory large framework? Otherwise, I'll go to questions. We have 4 minutes, five minutes.
So I think, in nutshell, and I'll be IP biased, but in nutshell, what we need to really do is, or India has to do, is transition into an IP-based economy. That is, if we have to compete with the rest of the world and the developed economies, this is where we need to work on.
Thanks, Neha. So if I have to summarize what we kind of got through today, right? We spoke about not only focusing on traditional rice, wheat technologies, look at more crops, oil seeds, and a whole bunch of other opportunities available in agriculture. That was one serious, yeah. Second thing, drip irrigation. I think India has a fair amount. Maybe we can do a little more to make sure the water scarcity doesn't come through. IP, I think that was a very new, it's a very important area, but I'm glad we were able to show a little bit of light on that. Then focusing on partnerships for innovations. I think we still lack innovations is what the consensus, at least on this panel, has been. So we need more. And to help that, we need I would say we need more policy innovations, we need more capital, we need a lot more people coming into this field to support this growth. So I think that's broadly what we spoke about. There's a lot of potential in science, in gene editing, and everything else. Bringing all of this together in a confluence would really help us in making sure we are much well prepared for the future of agriculture. So I think we can take maybe just one question. Anybody on a question? Krish, one question. Anybody?
First and foremost, I want to ask one question. IP firms, are you threatened by deep tech, which is going to, replace IP consultants?
Not at all.
Deep research,
No,
AI.
no.
What
Kiran always has the sharpest questions, right?
So we actually, tested AI to get some answers, and they failed every time. So yes, it is not possible to replace. I think wherever you need to automate processes, AI to analyze data can be used. Yes.
What I'm saying is, your firm can start using AI, because we reason as
Right.
much as an AI tool would reason. So I'm just saying,
Yes.
is that something you would consider?
Yes, definitely. And I think all firms are considering, at least at some stage, initial stages, definitely not that we have taken a conscious decision of when we are dealing with confidential information, because it has been discussed, machine learning is all about the data set, and we are very conscious about the confidentiality that goes in, and are we really training the systems with all the confidential information to be there to train others? So we are conscious about that. But yes, there are certain processes that can be made more efficient later down the process, and that is definitely, I think the firms are getting into implementation of AIs.
I would say I largely agree with what Neha has mentioned. I was at a conference a few months ago, and what was mentioned is that generative AI is very much at a college graduate level, but not quite at that PhD level yet. So of course, it could only be a matter of time before it comes to that level. But at the moment, I still think there's a very strong role for humans. There's still a lot of problems with AI on hallucination and things like that, etc. So there's a very strong human role needed. But who knows how long that will last for and how humans can continue to make themselves relevant. Yeah.
No,
Nobody
and I
should be
think
complacent.
the Kiran, to your point about the IP stuff, right? A lot of that is digitized, right? So one of the things to get this stuff up and going is that the data is available in formats and structures that it can digest and learn on. So I think it's pretty ripe for it getting disrupted. So,
I think
the
we're
time-
there, but not yet
Not
there.
yet,
So
but-
just
but
a little
it's
more.
there.
With that, I think we'll conclude this.
Sure. Just a little note on that. One is, of course, that I actually know of IP consultants being laid off because now companies are taking it in-house. The second thing that I just want to mention is, of course, there's the danger of building it on DeepSeek and losing some data. So I think people are being a little wary, but I think it's there. The capability has come, and stacks are being built very rapidly. That will actually make this a very different game.
Thank you. I think last question, yeah, please.
Hey, thanks for a fantastic panel. So one quick question, perhaps to add fuel to the fire here, is we're talking about IP in agri.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the way the agri regulations work in India, it is counter IP-driven tech. What I mean by that is, the way the approvals are given is, if I create a category as an IP enabler, I basically open the road for everybody else coming after me to get into the market very easily, right? And that's a big challenge for IP-driven innovation in agriculture in India. That's the first point. Would love to hear your thoughts on
So
how to
maybe I
overcome
can
that.
answer that because we also have similar issues in the company, right? When you make something, you go register it, and then you have a range of companies coming in trying to do what you spent 10 years doing. But what we've also realized is if we can be a little more sharper with IP on focus on product-driven IP versus a process-driven IP. That way it's a lot more policeable to some extent. It's still a hard one. But the registration challenges are a completely different one. CIB, for example, gives you a 2 years data protection. Many of the other regulations don't give you any data protection. There, I think, at least as a company, we've come to a point where you're only going to survive by continuously innovating and not standing on what you have done in the past. That's been our personal learning. I agree with you, it would be great to have protections. It would probably get a lot more companies coming into the space. But today, this is where we stand on the regulatory aspect. Thank you.
Yeah, and unfortunately, when you combine that with the judicial environment we have,
Yeah.
so I'd love to hear your thoughts. Yeah.
But thank you, everyone. Thank you for this fantastic discussion and the audience for participating. Thank you.
So that brings us to the end of this engaging panel discussion. A huge thank you to our speakers for sharing their knowledge and expertise, and to our moderator for expertly leading this session and fostering such an engageful and insightful discussion. I would like to invite Mr. Sanjeev Nilappa, Managing Director, Yokogawa Technology Solutions and Governing Body Member of ABLE, to give the token of appreciation to the panel.